For months, Israel's been parking tanks on Yasser Arafat's front door. Israeli rockets have exploded just metres from his office. Yasser Arafat is a prisoner, unable as he once did to travel at will. It's his punishment for not stopping the suicide bombers and locking up the gunmen. Many think he's lucky to still be alive.
Are you doing everything you can to stop attacks?
I am doing 100% effort, but no one can give 100% results. We had arrested many of those who are behind these activities, especially against Israeli civilians. We cannot accept. We are against anything against our civilians, and also we are against anything against the Israeli civilians.
Israel's Prime Minister Ariel Sharon says he doesn't plan to kill the Palestinian leader. But Yasser Arafat isn't so sure.
Do you think Ariel Sharon would quite like to see you dead?
You can ask him this question.
What do you think?
Not to forget that there was something in his mind since the longest Arab-Israeli battle, which continued 88 days in Beirut, the siege of Beirut.
It's 20 years since Ariel Sharon got his big chance to dispose of Yasser Arafat. During the famous siege of Beirut that reduced large areas of the Lebanese capital to rubble. It was home then to Arafat and the Palestine Liberation Organisation. Ariel Sharon, then Israeli Defence Minister, led the campaign that drove them out. And just as Beirut still bears the scars, it's left an enduring mark on the relationship between the two men.
Same thing was during the siege of Beirut. Also, we were surrounded by tanks and planes and bombardments, etc. And still Arafat is there. What can Sharon do? Kill him? Okay, and then what? It won't solve the problem, the Palestinian problem.
20 years ago, Walid Jumblat and Yasser Arafat were brothers in arms during Lebanon's civil war. The leader of Lebanon's Druze community warns against writing off the ageing Palestinian leader.
He's a great survival. He's quite intelligent, and still is the symbol, up to that moment, symbol of the Palestinian people and Palestinian upheaval, Palestinian resistance, should I say.
When Mr. Arafat sailed out of Beirut harbour all those years ago, many consigned him to the scrap heap of Palestinian politics. Yasser Arafat's flight from Beirut in 1982 was a humiliation, but at least he lived to fight another day, and it was a close-run thing. As Mr. Arafat was about to board his boat, an Israeli sniper had him in his sights and asked for permission to fire. But the then Israeli Defence Minister Ariel Sharon was told that Israel had agreed that Mr. Arafat could leave Beirut alive. 20 years later, Mr. Sharon has his man cornered again. Cornered, but to what end? The Israeli Prime Minister knows he can't kill the Palestinian leader, but he wants to push him aside and deal with Palestinians he thinks he can trust, people who really will stop the suicide bombers and gunmen.
Does your call for a total ceasefire still hold in the occupied territories and in Israel proper?
Yes. And he was asking about 7 days. You remember after my initiative in last December, we gave him 24 days. And it was not me who was saying this. Even some of his ministers in his cabinet and some of his high officers had mentioned that why we are not following what we had promised.
Mr. Sharon says you're just not doing enough. You're not arresting enough people.
And now we had a problem because the majority of our prisons had been destroyed. Where we have to put our prisoners?
Do you know at the moment how many people are still in the prisons that remain?
Oh, we have it, but we had shifted them we have difficulties, no doubt, and we are obliged to shift them after the damage and which had happened
So
with
when
these
Mr.
prisons to flats.
So when Mr. Sharon calls on you to lock up more people, is that possible for you?
I'm doing it.
Even now?
Although, even now,
Marwan Barghouti is head of Fatah in the West Bank, the largest faction in the PLO, controlled ultimately by Yasser Arafat. When Mr. Arafat calls for a ceasefire, it's Marwan Barghouti's job to convince the gunmen to put away their weapons.
According to our experience, I am one of these people who don't believe there is any chance for the negotiations to be succeeded without resistance and intifada on the ground.
In broad terms, the debate within mainstream Palestinian politics is between a group of older leaders who've presided over nearly a decade of negotiations without getting a Palestinian state, and a younger guard who believe that Israel will only talk when it really hurts.
I think that this intifada came as a result of the Palestinian disappointment from the peace process and also from the way of that the leadership lead the peace process and the negotiations and the performance internal the Palestinian society.
Have you done everything you can to fight the corruption and the inefficiency within the Palestinian Authority?
I am doing my best, and what what you are mentioning, corruption, definite the corruption everywhere all over the world, but we are taking care of this very important point, and we are facing it.
But even those who've criticised the administration in the past now put these concerns below the wider political objectives.
I don't think it makes any sense to blame one person, namely Arafat, for the failures of the entire Palestinian people or the performance of the entire civil service. I'm not saying that Arafat is a wonderful administrator. He has his faults, but even assuming the existence of these faults, the other people around him have to take into account the fact that they share the responsibility.
Sari Nusseibeh is a Palestinian academic and politician who's made himself unpopular in his own community by uttering some painful truths. Among them, that most refugees will never be able to return to what is now Israel.
I think people have to have the courage, they have to have the transparency to say exactly what they think is possible. And this has to be addressed to the Palestinian people. For instance, it is necessary for the Palestinian refugees to know that a wholesale return to a pre-existing 1967 Israel in homes that some people dream exist is just out of the question. It isn't possible.
It's 2 decades since Yasser Arafat fled Beirut, but his is still a powerful presence in the refugee camps of Lebanon. Here, the dream of returning to homes lost more than half a century ago is life itself. The reality that Israel will never agree to take back more than a few thousand Palestinian refugees is rarely mentioned. The right of return is a sacred tenet of the Palestinian struggle. Mounier Maqdah heads the Fatah militia at the Ain al-Helwa refugee camp in Lebanon. He supports the latest tactics of increasing armed attacks against Israeli targets, and he has some advice for Mr. Arafat.
Our people have chosen armed struggle against the occupation after 10 years of hopeless negotiations, because the Jews are Jews and they never keep their promises. If Arafat wants to keep his position as the symbolic and historic leader of the Palestinians, he must choose the path of struggle against the occupation. If he goes back to negotiations, he'll lose his popularity.
Mr. Arafat's critics will say that won't be a problem for him. that he's always ready to sponsor violence when it suits him and to play the statesman when he has to. But the world is a little different now. After September the 11th, he's come close to losing the international legitimacy which is his greatest asset. Without it, his authority among Palestinians is greatly diminished.
Not to forget, I had started the Peace of the Brave with my partner, General Ishaq Rabin, who had been killed by these fanatic groups in Israel. And in spite of that, in spite of what we are facing, we cannot forget our promises with our partner, Rabin, and we are completely committed to the Peace of the Brave, which you had started. And for this, we are in need of a quick move and a strong push from the international community, especially from the American administration.
On the outskirts of Ramallah, Palestinians trudge up and down this road every day. They can't take their cars through, and whether they move at all is up to the Israeli soldiers on the checkpoint. These are the daily frustrations of life under occupation, which lie at the heart of Palestinian grievances.
Who's leading the uprising now, you or the people in the street?
The people. Do you think the humiliation which I don't know if you have the opportunity to pass through one of these
Frequently.
Frequently. Do you see the humiliation of our people? What do you think of the assassination of our leaders, the destroying of all our infrastructures, the complete siege of our towns and cities and villages and reoccupation again of our Palestinian areas who had been liberated according to Oslo agreements, which I had signed with my partner, Rabin.
Far from damaging his standing, being cooped up in Ramallah courtesy of the Israelis has probably helped Arafat's street cred. To relieve the boredom, they've been bringing in the party faithful, little pep sessions to keep everyone's spirits up, rallying around Arafat, the one they call Abu Ammar.
Our message, comrades and brothers. Abu Ammar is our leader and symbol. Our message to the Israelis and our message to the Americans. Abu Ammar is our leader and symbol. He was the one who was elected.
Yasser Arafat is unique. No other Palestinian figure comes close to mustering such broad support. No other Palestinian appears on stamps with other world leaders, or on T-shirts, or can be bought in inflatable form at the PLO's souvenir shop. The merchandising of Yasser Arafat will not transform the Palestinian economy, but it does reflect who he is, the first popularly elected Palestinian leader. It might be difficult to shift Yasser Arafat's souvenirs at the moment, but that's no reason to write off the Palestinian leader. If anything, his confinement in Ramallah has increased his support. There are changes in Palestinian politics, but they're being played out over years, not weeks or even months. For the moment, Yasser Arafat remains very firmly at the top. Not that you'd think so, talking to one of the leaders of the PLO's strongest faction, whose endorsement of Yasser Arafat is clearly conditional.
We should give the priority now for the struggle against the Israeli occupation. And the people who lead the struggle against the occupation should lead the Palestinian people.
Does that still leave a place for President Arafat as that struggle continues?
Yes, of course. I think that Mr. Arafat is leading the Palestinian struggle.
Yasser Arafat is having trouble holding the line with his own people. He might still be committed publicly to the peace of the brave, but the patience of many Palestinians has simply run out. And his priority now isn't so much peace with Israel, but peace within his own ranks.